had a gig at Arco Arena in Sacramento.
Yeah.
Flying to San Francisco.
Country legend Ronnie Dunn drops bombshell confession that will change everything you thought you knew about Brooks and Dunn. Country music fans, brace yourselves. Ronnie Dunn, the legendary voice behind hits like Neon Moon and My Maria, has just broken decades of silence, revealing something that could shatter everything you thought you knew about Brooks and Dunn. The iconic duo, known for their unparalleled chemistry, might not have been what it seemed. After Neon Moon, Ronnie found himself alone, wondering, does anyone still want to hear my voice, without my partner? But it wasn't just any quiet moment. This time, the camera caught him walking off stage mid-song, his hand over his heart, looking utterly broken. The question everyone's asking, what on earth could have destroyed one of country's biggest duos? Could the truth behind their split be even more jaw-dropping than we imagined? Ronnie Dunn, at 71, finally opens up. The night at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis started like any other, with Brooks and Dunn kicking off their set in front of a packed crowd of 20,000 fans. The energy was electric as Kix Brooks jammed out, guitar in hand, feeding off the wild crowd like the seasoned pro he is. But something was off with Ronnie. He stood front and center, gripping the mic with that signature voice, the same grit that could bring tears to your eyes or lift your spirit. But as the song reached its peak, everything changed. Ronnie slowed down. His movements became heavy, almost like the guy who once owned the stage was fading. The bassist was the first to notice, a subtle shake of his head. The audience missed it, but the band didn't. They'd been through everything together, tough tours, sickness, exhaustion. But this was different. A radio host, Matt Malone, caught the moment on his phone. It was the kind of gut punch, quiet moment that changed everything. Ronnie glanced at his bandmates. No words, just a look only someone who'd played thousands of shows would understand. The audience kept singing, unaware of what they were witnessing. Then, slowly, Ronnie walked to the front of the stage. It wasn't part of the show. His gaze swept across the crowd, and in that instant, he did something no one expected. He held out his arms, but not in that usual, thank you, good night, way. It was softer, like a mix of gratitude and farewell. He tapped his chest over his heart, then waved. The murmurs started. People were confused, concerned. And just like that, he walked off stage. Kix and the band kept playing, but it was clear something monumental had just unfolded. Backstage, it was chaos. No one knew what was happening. The crowd was left trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The next day, Malone shared the video on social media with a simple caption, "Feel better, Ronnie." And it exploded. Thousands of shares, likes, and heartfelt comments flooded in. For so many, this wasn't just another concert moment. This was personal. Fans poured out their emotions, many of them recalling how Ronnie's music had carried them through tough times. The speculation ran wild. Was Ronnie sick? Exhausted? Or was it something worse? Country music forums lit up with theories. These weren't just casual fans. These were people who'd grown up with Brooks and Dunn's music in their lives, on the radio, at weddings, in their old pickup trucks. Ronnie and Kix weren't just stars. They were part of the soundtrack to so many lives. By Monday, an official statement eased the panic, explaining Ronnie had been unwell during the encore. Short, sweet, and no drama. But fans wanted more. When you've followed someone for decades, you need to know they're okay. Especially someone like Ronnie, who never just bailed on a show. Saturday night, the next stop on the tour in Rosemont, Illinois, held the big question, would Ronnie show up? He did. And not only did he show up, he absolutely crushed it. At 71, he brought the same fire, the same voice, and the same energy that made him a legend in the first place. That night proved that whatever happened in Indy, it wasn't the end of the road. Time may slow you down, but it doesn't erase the greatness that got you here. Fans won't just remember the stumble, they'll remember the powerful comeback. With 3 more shows on the New Moon Tour, Ronnie showed everyone that even at 71, he could still light up an arena. But the story goes much deeper. Long before fame, before the tours and the awards, there was just a regular kid chasing a dream. In 1953, in the small town of Coleman, Texas, Ronnie Gene Dunn was born into a working-class family, destined for greatness in a way no one could have predicted. This is the story of how 2 separate paths collided, creating one of country music's most iconic duos. Sundays in Ronnie Dunn's world were reserved for church, and Wednesdays were for prayer meetings. It was a rhythm that defined his life, one that everyone expected him to follow. Growing up, it was a given that he'd become a Baptist preacher, just like the men he admired every week. But when he arrived at Hardin-Simmons University, things took an unexpected turn. His textbooks were filled with scriptures, and his notes were full of sermon ideas, yet something else was pulling at his soul, something stronger than any pulpit could offer. It wasn't faith he was drawn to. It was music. While his roommates stayed up studying scripture, Ronnie would sneak off with his bass guitar, strumming melodies that felt more like home than anything he read in class. By day, he was the preacher in training. By night, he was an up-and-coming musician, performing in smoky Texas bars and honky-tonks. And in those late-night gigs, he found something theology could never offer: connection. The music was raw, real, and unrefined. It was alive, and it resonated with people in a way words from the pulpit never could. Eventually, the school found out about Ronnie's double life, and they made him choose, preacher or musician. He couldn't do both, and just like that, he was kicked out of school. His family was devastated. His whole future had crumbled overnight. But this was just the beginning. About 400 miles away in Shreveport, Louisiana, another future country star was finding his way. Kix Brooks, born Leon Eric Brooks, grew up in a neighborhood steeped in music. One of his neighbors, country legend Johnny Horton. For Kix, the pull of music wasn't some dramatic revelation. It was in his blood. In 1976, Kix packed up and headed for Nashville, sure that he was meant for the stage. He didn't wait long before making a name for himself as a hit songwriter, penning chart toppers like I'm Only in It for the Love for John Conley and Modern Day Romance for the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. Nashville took notice fast. While Kix was on the rise, Ronnie was still struggling. After releasing a few singles in the early 80s, he saw little success. One song barely cracked the top 60, and his dreams of stardom began to fade. Was he crazy to walk away from the church for this? The doubts crept in, but little did he know, his breakthrough was just around the corner. In 1989, everything changed. A drummer friend, Jamie Oldacre, secretly entered Ronnie into a talent contest sponsored by Marlboro. Ronnie had no idea, but when he won, the prize was a recording session in Nashville. After years of rejection and uncertainty, this tiny break felt like a lifeline. During that session, producer Scott Hendricks heard something in Ronnie's voice. It was raw, powerful, and unlike anything he'd heard before. Hendricks passed the tapes to Tim Dubois at Arista Nashville, who immediately saw potential. But Dubois didn't stop there. He had a vision. He thought Ronnie needed someone to help bring out his true power, someone who could complement his style. That's when Dubois had the idea: what if we put him with Kix Brooks? Despite Kix's success behind the scenes, he had yet to break through as a performer. Dubois had a hunch that their contrasting personalities could create magic. So, he introduced the two men, two strangers who didn't know each other at all. Their first meeting, awkward, to say the least. Neither knew if this was going to work. But then, something magical happened. They sat down to write a song together, and it just clicked. The magic was undeniable. They recorded a demo, and it took off like wildfire. In no time, they were signing a record deal, and by June 1991, they released their debut single, Brand New Man. The world wasn't ready for what came next. That first album produced 4 #1 hits in a row, a feat never accomplished by any other country duo. The success was instant, and it was massive. Ronnie, who had once doubted whether he belonged in music at all, suddenly had fans across the country hanging on every word. The kid from Coleman, Texas, had found his crowd. But this wasn't just a group of listeners, it was a movement. When Brand New Man hit radio in 1991, it turned Nashville upside down. No one had expected the seismic shift that was about to unfold. Radio stations, accustomed to the old sound, suddenly had to keep up with this fresh, high-energy duo that was changing the game. And it didn't stop there. My Next Broken Heart hit #1, followed by Neon Moon, then Boot Scootin' Boogie. In total, their debut album produced 4 consecutive #1 hits, a record never before seen in country music. But it didn't just stop on the charts. Boot Scootin' Boogie became an anthem that took over dance floors. From Texas honky-tonks to New York City, people were doing line dances like it was second nature. The song even cracked the Billboard Hot 100, drawing in non-country fans from all over. And in the center of it all were two men who couldn't have been more different. Ronnie, the quiet, intense one with a voice that could hit you in the chest. And Kix, full of energy, completely owning the stage. Together, they were unstoppable. Their first album sold over 6 million copies, setting the stage for a career that would redefine country music. And that was just the beginning. Album 2, Hard Workin' Man, hit the ground running with more chart toppers and radio hits, reaffirming Brooks and Dunn's place at the top of country music. Then, in 1994, they bagged a Grammy for Best Country Performance by a Duo or Group, solidifying their status as not just popular but legitimately talented. By 1996, they did the impossible. They became the first duo ever to win the prestigious CMA Entertainer of the Year award. That was a category typically reserved for solo artists with massive stage presence, but Brooks and Dunn showed that two people could bring just as much firepower to the table. Then came My Maria. Initially, Ronnie had doubts about covering a 1972 B.W. Stevenson track, but it turned out to be one of their smartest moves. My Maria not only held the #1 spot for 3 weeks but also became the top country song of 1996, even crossing over onto pop charts. It opened the floodgates to an entirely new audience. From 1992 to 2006, they were unstoppable, claiming Duo of the Year at the CMAs every year except for 2000, when Montgomery Gentry briefly snuck in. Their domination wasn't just based on their popularity, it was their range, growth, and commitment to evolving as artists that kept them at the top. Their live shows were something else entirely. Stadiums packed with 50,000 fans, pyrotechnics lighting up the night, and stage setups more reminiscent of rock concerts than traditional country shows. They didn't just perform, they created an entire experience for their audience. Some of their tracks became full-blown anthems, with Only in America even being adopted by both George W. Bush and Barack Obama during their presidential campaigns. It was a song with a universal message of hope that transcended political boundaries. And it wasn't just about the music. Both Kix and Ronnie were dedicated to giving back in meaningful ways. Kix, a huge advocate for children's charities and music education, received the CMA Foundation Humanitarian Award in 2015 for his efforts. His Keep the Music Playing program had contributed over $11 million to Tennessee schools by then. Meanwhile, Ronnie used his Rock the Barn concerts to raise funds for causes like Gilda's Club and the St. Thomas Breast Cancer Center. These weren't just flashy performances, they were events that genuinely made a difference. Albums like Brand New Man, which went 6 times platinum, and Hard Workin' Man, 5 times platinum, were the foundation of their legacy. Even their greatest hits albums flew off the shelves, helping them introduce a new generation of fans to their music. By the time they announced their retirement in 2009, the two had racked up 20 #1 hits, 2 Grammys, and a stack of awards that were practically taller than the duo themselves. No other country duo had ever done what they did, and it seemed unlikely that anyone ever would. But their impact wasn't just about the numbers. Brooks and Dunn set a new standard for what a country duo could achieve. Their sound, their style, and their stage presence redefined the genre, paving the way for countless artists who followed their lead. And yet, despite all the success, the end was drawing near. What happens when the music fades and the lights go out for good? What happens when success feels like a prison? The announcement came on August 10, 2009, like a punch to the gut for fans. After 20 years of selling out arenas, winning awards, and making music history, Brooks and Dunn were calling it quits. But it wasn't because of a falling out or any drama, it was burnout, plain and simple. Behind closed doors, Kix and Ronnie had been talking for a while. They had done it all. They had the fame, the accolades, the record sales. But somewhere along the way, the spark faded. They were no longer inspired. It had started to feel more like a grind than a dream. For Kix, the decision to step away felt like freedom. There were other ventures he wanted to pursue, radio gigs, maybe some work in film. There was a whole world outside of music that he was curious about. But for Ronnie, the idea of walking away felt like falling off a cliff. In 2010, they kicked off their last rodeo farewell tour. It was equal parts celebration and goodbye, a bittersweet send-off for two legends who had given it all. Night after night, Ronnie stood there, singing the songs that had shaped his entire adult life. Each show felt like it was one step closer to the end, and that realization made it all feel heavier. The crowds, louder than ever, gave him a sense of validation, but somehow, it didn't feel like enough. The final curtain came down on September 2, 2010, at Nashville's Bridgestone Arena, and as the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Ronnie was left with a haunting question: who am I without Brooks and Dunn? The answer wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't clear. At 57, Ronnie found himself standing at a crossroads. The country music landscape had shifted dramatically since he first hit the scene in 1991. Radio was now dominated by younger artists, and the sound of country music had evolved. The voice that had once ruled country airwaves began to feel out of place. His first solo album dropped in June 2011, and while it showcased his unmistakable voice and solid songwriting, it didn't connect with country radio. DJs who once eagerly queued up Brooks and Dunn tracks seemed to have moved on, and that sting, that feeling of rejection, was hard to shake. Recording sessions lost their magic. What used to be a place of creative freedom had turned into a space full of doubt. Ronnie found himself dragging through the studio, questioning everything: the music, his voice, his place in the industry. Confidence, once his armor, started to crack. The man who once owned every stage began pulling back, retreating into himself. Days spent at his farm near Nashville became a kind of escape, but it was a lonely one. Mentally, the weight was crushing. Without Brooks and Dunn, Ronnie felt lost, like he was watching a world that no longer had room for him move on without him. Late nights were the worst. He'd lie awake, tossing and turning, wondering if it was all over. Was the ride done? Would anyone care to hear his voice again? Even interviews started to feel forced. He'd smile, he'd answer questions, but underneath, he felt it. Radio people were respectful, but unsure. They didn't know where to place him anymore. In 2014, he gave it another shot with a second solo album. The critics liked it, but once again, it didn't connect commercially. The isolation grew worse. What used to be a peaceful retreat on the farm now felt like a cage. Ronnie spent hours walking around, trapped in his own head, replaying doubts and fears that seemed to multiply every day. The guy who had once filled stadiums with joy was now questioning if anyone even cared to hear him sing. The people who had been there from the start, those who knew Ronnie's history, started to worry. The fall from mega success to struggling solo act had come swiftly, and it hit hard. No one knew if Ronnie would find the fire again, the spark that had first lit up honky tonks in Texas and led him to superstardom with Kix. The doubts kept piling up. Did I make a mistake leaving Brooks and Dunn? Was it foolish to think I could go solo? Does my voice even matter anymore? By 2014, Ronnie was at rock bottom. Professionally, at least. The man who had once packed arenas and dominated the charts was now sitting in silence, wondering if his time had passed. But sometimes, hitting rock bottom is the very thing that sets the stage for rebirth. And for Ronnie Dunn, that transformation didn't happen in a fancy studio or on a packed stage. It happened on his quiet Tennessee farm, away from all the noise, away from the pressure of radio and record labels. No one expected anything from him. No pressure, no expectations. And that's when something magical happened. For the first time in a long time, Ronnie just wrote. No agenda, no plan to chase hits or win awards. It was just him and his guitar, reconnecting with the very essence of why he fell in love with music in the first place. The songs that came out of that period were different, raw, honest, and real in a way that hadn't been possible when he was chasing radio play. There was no pressure to land on the charts or make waves in the industry. It was about creating music that felt true, that felt healing. It was about writing songs that mattered. And that was the essence of peace, love, and country music, Ronnie's 2014 album. It didn't blow up like his old records, but that wasn't the point. What mattered was that it was authentic, it was him. It was a complete departure from the arena-sized anthems of his past, offering a smaller, more personal sound. It was freeing. Then, in another surprising move, Ronnie did something no one expected. He started his own label. With that, he reclaimed control over his music, his time, and his artistic vision. No more middlemen, no more gatekeepers. He didn't just want to make music, he wanted to help other artists who were struggling to stay true to themselves in a music business that often tries to smooth out the edges. Ronnie became a mentor, a guiding force for those trying to hold on to their authenticity in a world that often pushes for something more commercial. Meanwhile, Kix Brooks was out there doing his own thing. He dived into radio, hosting American Country Countdown, a job that suited him perfectly. It allowed him to stay close to the music he loved, connecting old-school country fans with new hits, sharing the stories behind the songs. The radio booth became a little stage for Kix, a place where he could just talk, something he was definitely good at. The two of them, on separate paths but still tied together by their shared history, were beginning to find their own way again. It wasn't the same as the golden days of Brooks and Dunn, but maybe that was the point. After all the highs and lows, the music still mattered. And in a way, they were both finding their way back to what made him great in the first place: authenticity, honesty, and the love of country music. After their split, Ronnie and Kix found themselves searching for new creative outlets. Kix dove into radio and small acting gigs, while Ronnie tried to find his footing as a solo artist. But in 2014, during a casual dinner, they talked about a Vegas residency, not as a comeback, but as a chance to play again, with no pressure. Reba McEntire invited him to join her at Caesar's Palace, offering an intimate setting to reconnect with the music and their fans. The residency reminded Ronnie that he still had it, and the spark was alive. This led to the Reboot albums, where today's country stars reimagined the classic hits. Reboot was a massive success, with artists like Luke Combs and Morgan Wallen breathing new life into their songs. The albums introduced them to a new generation of fans, proving that great music only evolves over time. In 2024, Brooks and Dunn won the CMA Vocal Duo of the Year, completing their full circle journey. After years of doubt, Ronnie realized he hadn't lost himself. He had just rediscovered the real, honest music that first brought him to the stage. And that's where the music lives.